No, we're not. Hello there, I'm David Ford. I run the Main Street Museum. Thank you all for coming. I just wanted to say happy birthday, because it's the Hops' happy birthday. It's their 50th birthday, and we're very honored that they have come down here tonight. It's a continuation of a long relationship between our scruffy little museum and the Hopkins Center, and we're overjoyed that you've continued your collaboration with the Main Street Museum. We hope to continue the favor. We have to return the favor. We're going to have some Main Street Museum artists and musicians come up to the Hop and perform up there. What do you think of that? Good? Yes. Thank you, Stephanie, Aaron, and all the other folks up there. And without further ado, I will introduce Stephanie or the musicians. You're right here. Right? So I'm going to introduce Stephanie and hand her this, and she's going to then later introduce me. So I'm going to introduce you.
It's all about creative collaboration and cycles and everything. I'm going to put this down so I don't drop the more expensive.
Hold that
the whole time?
The whole time, yeah, otherwise you can't.
I'm like juggling, I like to gesture and I'm holding. Everybody sees me holding it, the photographers have gotten the picture, right? Okay, great. So, hi, welcome. Thank you, David. I am Stephanie Pacheco. I manage outreach and arts education programs at the Hopkins Center, and I would also just love to thank our gracious hosts, David, Nicole, everyone here at the museum. I'm doing all my thank yous at the beginning. Ava, Center for Cartoon Studies, Revolution, the other folks at the Hop who helped us make this happen, and Brooklyn Rider, Tim for tech, Erin for everything, because she does everything, and especially New England Foundation for the Arts, because they're a big sponsor of this residency here, and that's enabled us to bring Brooklyn Rider here days ahead of their performance. They're performing Friday night at the Hopkins Center at Spalding. And we invited them up here to do about 8,000 events with campus and students and the community and local artists. So we're very grateful that they decided to do that. So we, for our 50th anniversary, have commissioned them. We have a long-standing history with Brooklyn Rider. And we've commissioned this new piece that they're premiering Friday called Brooklyn Rider Almanac. And they're going to talk about it in a minute, but it investigates some really interesting questions about how we create our artistic influences and how we find our creative community. And so they have asked 5 composers, right? For the piece that you're going to see on Friday night, it's 5 composers to explore the idea of how a prominent creative figure in the last 5 decades has profoundly affected their identity as a musician. And they're really building a modern-day almanac, and you'll hear about their inspiration for this. But working with artists from multiple genres and multiple disciplines, they're really asking the question of these composers: who do they inspire? Who inspires them? How are these artists working together and collaborating? And how does that community really change the way that we think about our own art form? Brooklyn Rider is really a leader in this kind of thinking. They're a genre-defying quartet and has gotten a lot of acclaim from both the classical music world, but other, world, rock, jazz. They met, well, I don't know, you originally met with Silk Road Ensemble? Yo-Yo Ma, you knew each other before, but they all played with Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road Ensemble. They are the only classical group to be invited to the South by Southwest Festival. And NPR has credited them with recreating the 300-year-old form of the string quartet. So I'll stop gabbing. They can introduce themselves. And they're going to tell you a little bit about Brooklyn Rider Almanac, perform a bit for you, and then we're going to have a conversation about our creative almanac here. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. My name is Nick. I'm from Brooklyn Rider. Hi. How's it going? Colin, can I have the staff?
Yeah.
I want the staff. We were reminded before we started that we should be careful, in fact, because the French composer Lully in the Baroque period, this is how they used to conduct in the day before the baton. But poor Lully actually ended up stabbing his foot, and it is said that he died of a staph infection.
No.
Sorry for the fun.
This is
And yeah, this is now we conduct by fear. So anyway, here we are, or the viola, actually, which is an equally fearful instrument of destruction. But okay, well, enough about me. Thank you for, this really feels like a living room to me. Like, this feels like the community's living room. And that's really the place where I think this kind of thing should happen. Where we should be having this kind of conversation. So, thank you for that. It makes us actually feel immediately welcome as the first of the 8,000 events to be doing it in such an environment, such a cabinet of curiosities here. We come from our own cabinet of curiosities, which is otherwise known as Brooklyn, New York, and so we feel a sense of immediate affinity with everything going on here, and all of you. So let's see a little bit about So tonight is kind of about the question of inspiration in general, and Colin was pointing out. This is Colin, by the way, behind me, Colin Jacobson. That's Eric Jacobson, who's Colin's brother, who's playing the cello, and this is Johnny Gandelsman over here, playing violin. And we were talking a little bit on the way over here. Colin was saying, well, of course, for an artist to do anything, they need to be inspired. I need to be inspired to wake up in the morning, really. And so that's kind of the story of creation, I think, over time. But there's something about kind of what we're talking about tonight, and also the idea of this Almanac project is something special happens, I think, when you make the idea of inspiration very explicit. To say, I'm inspired by this, and you name it. You name it in front of a community, and you see what that does to your art form. And I think there's something nice about that. That's what we're going to attempt to do with this Almanac project. Part of that idea, asking artists, what has happened in 50 years that's really inspired you, the artistic community. And so it's the 50th anniversary of the Hop, of course, so that was a handy number to have, but it's also, we looked at it and we were like, wow, 50 years is kind of the explosion of popular culture in this country. It's really like the rise of rock and roll, for instance. And so all the composers that we're looking to are people who come from outside of the classical music establishment, right? And I was just asked the question by a newspaper reporter, how do we feel about the term? She was trying to imply that it's kind of a stilted term, like a classical string quartet. And I said, I don't really have a problem with that, because we love the tradition that we come from. It's a great tradition. My problem is the way that other people view that term. And in many ways, I want that the experience of what we do with the quartet and what we're doing with this Almanac project to be as inclusive as possible. So we've actually purposely gone outside of the classical music establishment. So the 5 composers who are featured in the Almanac on Friday night will be, now I hope I remember everybody's name, Padma Newsome, who's a great Australian musician, used to be in the National. He's in a band now called the Clogs. Greg Saunier, who's the drummer of the great band Deerhoof, originally from the Bay Area. We have Bill Frisell, the great jazz guitarist. Nick Barsh, who's a pianist of a group called Ronin. It's a Zurich-based jazz, zen, funk, I don't know what you want to call it, group that's amazing. And we also have Ethan Iverson, who's a pianist of the Bad Plus. And so we're really excited to put these people on the platform and see what they could do for a string quartet. And I think the results will be really exciting. Now, we're going to play some music, I think. And if that's okay. Oops. So, now, I'm going to apologize, but it's kind of a teaser. The pieces that I just mentioned, we're not going to play any of those for you right now, because that's for the concert on Friday. And part of this residency week is that we're actually rehearsing these pieces, so the ink is very much still drying on a lot of those. So that's the exciting part. And I think part of that exciting thing about the concert, we're talking about inspiration, and I hope you all can join in that concert, because I really think the concert is kind of like a circular experience. We're going to learn something about ourselves in the process, about what inspires us. But hopefully you can all come to the concert and actually reconsider the question in your own lives through the medium of the concert and the live experience, which I think brings everything to a very poignant moment in time. However, right now I think we're going to play 3 pieces, but they all have something to do with this question of inspiration, and we will make those relationships explicit as we go. Okay.
This guy is scarier than I thought. I'm going to put him down for a second. So that was fun. That was a piece, that was a movement of a piece by a wonderful New York composer and band leader whose name is Lyova Zhurubin. And, you know, we're talking about inspiration and what it means to be inspired. And you know, we're on the road a lot, and often we are inspired or just struck by something in our travels. And travel is one of the great, you know, ways to be inspired by something unknown to you. And this piece was inspired by a trip that Lev took to Romania, to a small village outside of Bucharest called Clujani, where he worked with gypsy musicians from that village. It's a gypsy village. And he worked with this incredible band called Terror of the Haiduks. Does anybody know? Has anybody heard of them? Yeah. They're incredible, and they're featured in this amazing film called Lachodrome, which, you know, kind of launched their international career, but they're very well known in Romania, and they're really magicians with what they do, you know, telling stories through music. And one of the leaders of that band was this really, really old gentleman by the name of Nikolai Ciasco, or his nickname was Kulai, and that's the name of this piece. And so for Lev, that trip, you know, I think he was aware of music of the Roma people before, and he's worked with it before, but that trip of you know, being in the environment where the music actually is created and working with musicians there has transformed Lev as a person, as a musician, as a composer, and that has happened to another friend of mine, which well, he'll talk about it later. But the next piece is by another friend of ours, who is a singer-songwriter. Let's see, is she singer-songwriter by night and violinist by day, or it's all at night? Okay, so she's a classically trained violinist and violist, beautiful, beautiful player, and she's also an incredible songwriter and singer. I mean, really beautiful, beautiful musician. And we've known her for a very long time. She's a dear friend. And when we started thinking about this idea of the Almanac, we also thought, you know, why not, while expanding the circle of people, of working with people we don't know, like the 5 composers that were commissioned by the HOP, we also wanted to extend the invitation to some of our dear friends that we haven't had the opportunity to work with in that capacity before. So we asked Christina to write us a piece, and she wrote a piece called Tralala. And she was inspired by Stravinsky, which is really cool. And actually, it's interesting, maybe it's because it's 100 years, or last year was 100 years of The Rite of Spring, but out of the composers, out of the pieces that we have so far, I think there are 3, right, that are inspired by Stravinsky. So, yeah, well, he was, I mean, there's a reason for that. Anyway, this is Tralala.
yeah, Johnny mentioned that, like Lev, I had a travel-inspiration. Nick and I went to Iran a few years ago, actually a while ago now, like 8 years ago, and while there we were visiting our friends, musicians from Iran, who we met in the Silk Road Ensemble, and one in particular, Kayhan Kalhor, I think has been here a number of times, has been a really big inspiration for me. I've been basically writing music since hanging out with him, which was something I did in high school, but then came back to. So I was just thinking of the story that goes with this next piece that we're going to play, and how it's possible that you have a mythic bird somewhere in the taxidermy collection here. I don't know, but you probably do. I don't know if you have a phoenix or a firebird, but this is basically related to that story, or the story of Icarus. Maybe you have a wing of his, but the story goes about there's a bird that tries to reach the sun, and it doesn't succeed the first time. It tries again, and finally on the third time it reaches the sun. And so when Nick and I were there, our friend played for us a recording of a guy playing on an instrument, a flute, that was basically made out of the fused bones of a bird. So not unlike what a kid will do with a blade of grass, it's a very piercing sound, but more potent than a blade of grass. And we were taken with it because it was so raw sounding, and it encoded the story within it, and it was really old. It probably goes back to Zoroastrian times, but sometimes something really old can sound really new. And maybe, in terms of inspiration, just that idea of getting out of one's immediate surroundings, in whatever mental space that is, allows you to see what you're doing better. So that was the inspiration I took and arranged this tune for string quartet. It's called Ascending Bird. Thank you.
up some of our local artists and talk about what inspires them. So bear with us just a moment. It shouldn't even be long. We're listening. So much conversation here already. So we kind of have been throwing around this term creative placemaking, which is a buzzword these days with the National Endowment for the Arts and a lot of grant makers. And working in the arts, I've noticed this shift from creative economy for a while was the term, and now we're going into creative placemaking, which is encouraging to me because I feel like for a while it was all about quantifying every single dollar. Like, well, if you have an arts activity, what kind of revenue does that bring in for hotels and stores and restaurants and all businesses? And now we're really kind of having this conversation about creating community and creating places. And for me, that was going hand in hand with the whole Brooklyn Writer Project of, who inspires us, who do we inspire, and, let's turn that conversation and that question back on ourselves as the Upper Valley and say, if we had to create a map and our own almanac, that's okay. If we had to create our own almanac, what would it look like? Who would be a part of it? And we at the Hop invited just a couple. I mean, there are many, many organizations, schools, businesses, places that are near and dear to our heart, our neighbors that we create everything with. And we invited a few of them to join us for this conversation of, what's our creative family tree. So real quick here, when we all sat down to figure out how we were going to have this panel discussion, James Sturm actually suggested Pachakacha, which is a Japanese presentation style that's gaining popularity all over the world. And we had, 6 to 8 reasonably intelligent adults in a room next door and spent the next 5 minutes just debating how to pronounce it. So, Erin, there we go. And we're staring at this word and we're like, Pekakucha? Pakakucha? We had no idea. So the first thing we did, as anybody ever does, is go to the internet, where we found this.
Pekakucha? Pachekacha. Pachekacha. Pachekacha.
Okay, so now we know how to pronounce it, and what the heck are we talking about? Pekakucha is Japanese, more or less, for chit-chat. And it was started by these architects in Tokyo who would do these design presentations and realized that designers could not shut up and didn't know how to keep things concise. And so they wanted to find ways to streamline this. And unsurprisingly, this translated for many artists because we all feel like we talk too much. And what happens in this format, they have these big, like, Pakakucha, see, I still can't even do it, nights all over the world now, where each speaker is given 20 slides that they select images, whatever they want slides of, and you have 20 seconds per slide to present whatever idea you want to present. And it's timed. The PowerPoint will just automatically turn. There's no overtime, you're not allowed to lag behind. When your time's up, your time's up. So we thought, that seems simple enough. It's really hard to do. And we decided to make it harder on ourselves by telling each speaker they only had 10 slides instead of 20, because we want to let them introduce themselves to you, talk a little bit about their inspirations, and then we're going to have a conversation with all of us and Brooklyn Writer and you about, what is this creative place we've made. So 5 speakers, 10 slides each, 50 slides, 50 creative inspirations, 50th anniversary of the Hop, and our first speaker is Nick Kortz from Brooklyn Writer. So he is a member of Brooklyn Writer, various other groups, among them the Knights, yada yada. He's already pushing me along here. You can see him as a soloist. He's performed with many orchestras and develops workshops for the New York City Department of Education. You can find him on Letterman or on Chinese national TV. He's all over the place. So we started by asking him, what inspires him, and also what inspires Brooklyn Rider.
I'm so nervous right now. I can't even tell you. When does it start?
You tell me. When you tell her to start it.
Okay. I think I'm ready. Ooh, yes, the Blue Rider. Well, this is a group about 100 years ago that did an almanac of their own, the abstract expressionist movement that really changed the course of things, and we love the idea of a group that includes musicians and artists and all kinds of people to do something beautiful that really changed the world. Oh, this is part of the string quartet tradition, which we love. This is a French quartet called the Capet String Quartet in the 1920s. We love being part of a tradition. You know, it's a very old and beautiful tradition, and it feels great to be a part of that. Well, this is us, and you can see that the string quartet of the 21st century looks different than the string quartet of the 1920s. However, I just wanted to say and to throw out to the guys that, you know, the other guys in the quartet are what inspires me. So this is our quartet again, plus somebody else, the bearded or the mustached man there, and that's the fellow that we visited in Iran. His name is Kayhan Kalhor. He's a master Persian musician. He plays the spike fiddle or the kamanche, and we love Kayhan. He's taught us a lot. So this is a concert that we put on in Brooklyn after we made an album, and this is a collaboration with a visual artist. His name is Kevork Murad. And this just, you know, he paints live in the moment. And to me, that's what happens in a concert. Everything happens in a set amount of time. This is a sculpture by the great artist Mary Frank. Mary did the cover of our last album called 7 Steps. She's an extraordinary artist. This is in her home in Woodstock, New York. And she's an inspirational figure for us. This is the last time we were at Dartmouth those years ago, and I would say what we're inspired by are learning situations which are two ways, that work two ways. This was in a chamber music class at Dartmouth, and we had a great time. We made a piece of music together in half an hour. This was, we also play a lot in schools around the country. This is a relationship we have in the Orlando City Public Schools. They have a wonderful program called A Gift for Music, where they give elementary school students string instruments to play. And we recently played for about 2,000 of them. Well, this is a snapshot of this group that has really been formative for all of us in terms of expanding our view of the world. This is the Silk Road Ensemble. We've done a lot of museum residencies. So here you see us inside the Art Institute of Chicago, playing music in an unexpected place. Chinese pipa, Chinese biwa, Japanese shakuhachi, Dartmouth alum. And this picture, I just wanted to surprise our quartet members. This is us playing at the US Open tennis tournament. We're inspired by our love of vintage tennis costumes and tennis. And I just wanted to say, you know, I think it's really important as an artist not to take yourself too seriously.
Our next speaker is Adam Blue, who is an artist. He is the education director of Ava Gallery and Art Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and his most recent exhibition was right here in this room, Astro Explorer Constellations in a Zodiac for the New Millennium, which has been made into a book that you can find on Amazon.com. And Adam, I just want to say, is a really great advocate for public art in our community and really has worked with so many organizations and institutions, from Advanced Transit to Cedar Circle Farm to working with the HOP to helping make our Hands on Pianos project happen this summer. And we're forever grateful for him to be such a part of our artist citizenry here. So, Adam.
Thank you, everybody. I am awed and honored by the chance to be here. This is expectations radically exceeded, so thank you. Quickly, just introducing Ava Gallery and Art Center so that everybody is aware of the organization that I'm representing tonight.
Part of your slide or
No,
not?
I'm not quite ready to start yet. So Ava is located in Lebanon. It is, everybody, so part of what we're trying to accomplish tonight is to sort of explore what is a creative tapestry of how everything fits together in an almanac. And as Ava is another organization, I just want to make sure everybody knows about it. We're having our 40th anniversary this year. We have many events scheduled. I hope that all of you will please, recognize that there's many opportunities in Lebanon, in Hanover, White River, everywhere. It's a very special place that we live in, and we all work very hard to make it happen for one another. So thank you. And now we can get started. So the first slide that we have is Edvard Munch, and I don't know if you are aware of this. Bente Torgersen, who is Ava's executive director for 25 years, actually has written the book on Edvard Munch. So I would, if anybody is ever interested in learning anything about him, please reach out to Bente. She is an incredible resource. This is an artist named Jason Yeagle. I've had a chance to work with him, and he as well. This is a piece that was done for a public art project on Market Street. He painted this, and it was installed in the bus stops running up and down in San Francisco. He also designed the cover for MF Doom's Food. I don't know if there's hip-hop heads in the house, but that's something exceptional. This is Margaret Kilgallen. She's an inspiration. She was part of the very first mission school in San Francisco. She's married to Barry McGee. There's a documentary called Beautiful Losers, that if you're interested in learning about her work, you should check that out. Neo Rauch is considered to be one of the leaders of the Leipzig School in Germany, formerly East Germany, and he makes these beautiful oil paintings that have sort of these elaborate narratives of dysfunctional social networks, and they're fascinating. Nothing ever quite makes sense. This is an artist named Martin Kippenberger. He's one of my all-time inspirations. As he got really big, he traveled around the world and did compulsive drawings on all of the hotel stationery wherever he stayed. He also did a series of installations of subway stations that were in the middle of lakes and ponds and other places you could never get. This is Bill Owens, a Northern California photographer who documented suburbia and documented leisure. He's an exceptionally humorous and delightful artist, only now beginning to receive recognition that's been long due since the 70s. John Baldessari I've had an opportunity to work with. I don't know if you're familiar with his work from LA. I got to be part of an installation of his, the I Will Not Make Any More Boring Art. It's one of his most famous pieces. The act of actually writing I will not make any more boring art on a gallery wall for 20 minutes is transformative. This is Ilya Kabakov, and this is a piece I chose for tonight called The Incident at the Museum. He emigrated from Russia in the 80s at Documenta, and then he installed inside of a gallery what was a dilapidated Russian second-tier museum piece. In terms of thinking about visual expression and inspiration, Edward Tufte, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, he's a graphic designer. This is envisioning information, among the most elegant representations of data sets. Absolutely highest recommendation to everyone to investigate his work. And then finally, Gita Board, and figured I needed to get a little bit of something in there like this. A book partially responsible for, they say, the revolution in France in '68, the student revolution. So media meets consumption meets the dynamics of life.
David Fairbanks Ford lived in New York City as a mural and painting conservator for many years before he settled back here in White River. The Main Street Museum was originally started in an abandoned storefront, and when this building, the old fire tower, came up for auction in 2003, the Main Street Museum was the only group to bid on it. And they are arts presenters, they are discovering this collection of mysterious objects and odd natural history specimens, and it is really a participatory Museum. I'm trying to feel like I have 20 seconds and I'm totally screwing it up. Museum. It's participatory, so they want you to be a part of it. Ask him about it later. But now we have David.
And by participatory museum, we mean, why have we been robbed of our cultural heritage? Why, in fact, do people be silent? Why should we be silent in a museum or gallery? Why do we have to not clap between movements in a classical work? What? How did that, explain that to me. So I'm not going to say anything else other than that. And I don't know what my slides are, and I'm going to refresh my memory right now. That is William Laurel Harris. He was the president of the Municipal Art Society in New York City. He studied under St. Gaudens up here in Cornish. He went to New York. He painted the dome of the Library of Congress. He's from Vermont. He lived in New York City. He's my granddad's first cousin, and he's why I love Vermont and New York City. The train station is why I lived here. I did not have a car when I was living in New York City. I had to get around by train or by foot, so I walked around from the train station, and I found White River Junction on foot. And the train just went by that takes you to D.C., and I'm really thankful for that train. We need another train. That is the Vermonter magazine. It's the predecessor to Vermont Life. It was published right here in downtown White River Junction. The building that it was published in was also our local newspaper. The building was torn down 2 months ago, but the Vermonter was published by Charles Royal Cummings, a genius editor and one who plugged Vermont for his entire life and lived right here in the downtown. Howard Flower was called the Indian poet of Vermont. He was a close friend of my grandparents. He lived in Heartland, Vermont. He wore sandals. He let his hair grow long. He was a socialist and wrote books and published books for Eugene Debs and had a printing house right there in Heartland, Vermont. He's an inspiration. The Twin State Fair, or the Vermont State Fair, was held right up on Sykes Avenue. Sykes Avenue, the home now of the car wash, the McDonald's, etc. That was the state fairgrounds up there, folks, the state fairgrounds. And then it was turned into a drive-in movie theater where I spent many happy times watching Son of Flubber as a child. Downtown White River Junction will be reborn. We're going to republish this postcard. It was published by the local Miller family of 25,000 gifts. The Miller family published these wonderful postcards. Just, the sky's the limit. The sky, let your imagination run wild about White River Junction. Think of that. And I do believe in dirigibles. I believe in solid frame airships. That's Lena's Lunch Building. That's where we started. The thing with the Pepsi sign, that's Lena's Lunch Building. It is, I believe, polystyrene sign. I'm researching plastics right now. It's in the hallway. Lena's Lunch was a sub shop. It was a blues bar, and it had transvestite waitresses after 9 o'clock. So it's no wonder we ended up there. This is the same front window you're looking at right now. This is the old fire station. They parked the hook and ladder trucks here. This is Fire District 1. Morancy, the captain of the fire department, came in here. Everyone, a lot of people in Hartford at least, really think it's great that it's still public. This is a fire station. This is a public building. In other words, that's you, public. This is Beltane's, the Beltane celebration. It's a May Day celebration with the Radical Fairies in Vermont. And one of the reasons I ended up in Vermont are the Radical Fairies. They're a gay, collective, hippie group that get together and eat horrible vegetarian food, but I love them all. And that's another reason why I ended up here. And that is Fred Tuttle. Fred Tuttle ran for Senate. He won the Republican nomination, and I am proud to say that I took Fred Tuttle to his first gay bar. And my friends, Sherry Tart and Yolanda, kissed him all over his face, and Fred said, "You people are good people, but don't tell my wife."
Makers in the Upper Valley. If some of you have never been down to White River for the Halloween parade every year, you gotta do it. Many of the folks here tonight are a part of that, and it is quite incredible. So next up is Kim Souza, who's the founder of Revolution. It's a White River Junction independent clothing store It supports a lot of independent and local designers. She grew up in the Upper Valley and returned here recently to raise her child. She serves as the unofficial ambassador for the Junction, singing its praises to everyone. In her store, you can buy the t-shirt that says White River Junction, it's not that bad. And she likes cats. And I think I'm actually wearing at least 2 items of clothing from Revolution tonight, so Kim.
Before we begin, where's Erin?
I'm right here.
Okay, so don't start quite yet. But I'm going to read notes, so I hope you'll draw your attention to the photographs and not me sitting here reading my notes.
But you're so pretty.
And thank you, Stephanie and Brooklyn Ryder. It is indeed an honor, and it's really just a wonderful event. This is a Monday night in White River Junction, ladies and gentlemen. It's true what they say, it's not so bad. Okay, all I'm going to do is this kind of thing. Okay, go. Mr. Peter Struman represents so much to so many without even trying. He's the founder of Bread and Puppet. He's the original hipster. This man's ability to walk his talk has influenced me both personally and professionally to be satisfied with simplicity. Oh, there was more. I didn't think I had more time. Eva Bees in Montreal, like the music of our guest Brooklyn Ryder, defies definition. This is where I first felt the difference between going shopping and a more connected experience. At Revolution, we function as much more than a clothing store, and even I haven't managed to put a label on it. Okay. I come from a long line of very strong women. These are very resourceful and resilient do-it-yourselfers, and these ladies have developed their own set of ethics, which have influenced my own perceptions in more ways than I ever imagined possible. We all adore Matt Busey. In addition to Matt, there are dozens of smart, sensible, well-respected members of this community who aren't compelled to practice business as usual, and that inspires the rest of us to be whoever we choose to be every day. Sometimes all it takes is an opportunity where an obstacle used to be, just to look at it from a different angle. Oh, wait. Bonnie turned 90 years old in 2012, and the whole town came out to toast to her as a valued member of the community. Bonnie ran Briggs Limited Department Store at 26 North Main Street. Okay, blah, 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 she's awesome. David Fairbanks Ford and the Main Street Museum are what attract anyone with the appreciation for an artistic endeavor to White River Junction. With this mix of provocative content and welcome atmosphere, the Main Street Museum is another genre-defying element that ironically helps define White River Junction as an arts community. As much as I love a positive attitude, I'm also strangely attracted to a fatalistic viewpoint. It's imagery like this GIF piece by titled Hollywood Doom by visual artist Stanley Donwood and INSA, which illustrate our civilization killing itself day in and day out.
No, we were allowed to.
Okay, keep going. There was more to that. I'm happy to show later. What most of us love about Banksy's work is how he illuminates the most basic paradoxes with his street art. These are the poignant one-liners of the art world, and it's accessible to everyone. Oh, I could go longer on that one. The outside world, just like I think it was Nick was saying, or maybe Colin, it's safe to say that one of the things that allow us to appreciate a rural New England community with such enthusiasm is getting out of town once in a while. And whether it's a nearby urban center or far-off exotic destination, nothing compares to coming home to a place that feels good. Okay. In the eternal quest to legitimize art, and its many mediums, Revolution is a showroom for hundreds of artists and their works. And although Revolution is a commercial venture, we try not to indulge the excessive tendencies of the fashion industry. And it says in our Revolution manifesto, we believe that fashion is a means to enhance our inner beauty and not to define it.
Get your Upper Valley hoodie sweatshirts, which they are lovely modeling for us at Revolution. James Sturm is a cartoonist and co-founder with Michelle Ali of the Center for Cartoon Studies, which is the only place in the country you can get a master's in cartooning. He writes a column about the internet for Slate, and notable publications include Adventures in Cartooning, Market Day, The Golem's Mighty Swing, and Fantastic Four Legends, Unstable Molecules. And I will say that James was one of my very first introductions to the Upper Valley community when someone invited me to a dinner party because they knew I moved up here 3 years ago knowing no one. And he was there, and so that will always stick with me. So here's James.
I just want to also thank everybody for making this happen. I've done some presentations here before, and it's always special. I feel like I've got the home field advantage when I talk in White River, so that's great. All right, let's go to let's get started, influences. So this is my first cartoon love, and the thing about Peanuts is there's like no backgrounds, and it's very minimal, but there's a really rich sense of space, and what is it about that place in Peanuts, The place is defined by insecurity, obsession, these intense relationships, and it made me really think about space in an interior way. From ages 8 to 18, I was obsessed with superhero comics. I could look at any panel of my vast collection and tell you who wrote it, who inked it, who drew it. And I spent countless hours drawing and wanting to be a cartoonist. And this was one of my first real aspirations, was to be a professional cartoonist. Then I go to college, and I discover the underground comics. And I discover that comics can be about anything, can be drawn any way. And you don't have to be a published cartoonist, you don't even need a publisher. You can just do it yourself. So I started publishing my own comics. And then I helped publish a newspaper. So a bunch of guys who started The Onion, we all got together and started The Stranger, and I published lots more comics, and I met a lot of cartoonists, and I became a better cartoonist. I met Jason Lutz in Seattle, who drew this, and then now he teaches in White River Junction at the cartoon school. It's fantastic. This is Karen Land, one of my big influences. She was able to see the inside of my body as clearly as she could tell me what color shirt I was wearing. And for over 12 years, she was like my primary physician and my therapist and my business advisor all rolled into one. And she made me believe that nothing was impossible, because even believe that somebody could do the things that she could do made you re-examine everything. Now, I couldn't find a good slide in my family, so this is what I have to do. I'm blessed to live with this woman, Rachel Gross, who's an amazing artist in and of herself. I have two amazing daughters, Charlotte and Eva, and nothing that I've drawn in the last decade hasn't been dramatically influenced by my family. American history, Jewish history, these two photos taken in the 1930s of people in hard times. Bottom photo, America, it's hopeful. Folks got a new deal. Top photo, Eastern Europe, same time. Tragic photo for obvious reasons. And what this tells me is that stories in history fundamentally shape the way we see. Local history. I was smitten the first time I came into town. Lots of stories here in White River Junction. You can just feel the stories, and I wanted to add to it. So here's a story. An old department store becomes a cartoon store. And that drawing is by Joseph Lambert, one of CCS's alumni. That's a little washed out, but this is the inside of the store, drawn by Blaise Laramie, one of CCS's fellows. Cartoonists are here from all over the world. They come to White River for several years, and they become more intimate with White River Junction through their work. By drawing what they see. And then, of course, that work goes off into the world, and people read their work. And as a kid, comics were as real to me as the real world, of course, but in a different way. They were more intimate in a lot of ways. And there's been enough comics made in White River Junction that I've literally overheard people on the street saying, it's just like that comic. It's just like in the comic. And when I hear that, for me, that's as real as it gets. So, thank you very much.
All right, we're going to pull up the screen and ask all of our speakers and Brooklyn Rider to join us back on stage and open up this conversation a little bit. Speaking stick. Well, we're going to keep the mic. Oh, no. Yeah.
like 10, 12 minutes.
Adam, Kim, David, Eric, Colin, Johnny.
Hello, James. James, they often set hyperjunction as one of the cartoons just before your skill was here, right? They said that before, long before.
So we have a mic we can pass, or I don't know how much lead. Oh, you know what? We have this one and we have this one.
Can people hear back here? Just out of curiosity.
You should be louder.
Okay.
All right.
We'll use.
Can you hear me from there? No, we can. We can pass.
Yeah. No. Well, we have two mics.
Two of them, yeah.
And why don't someone on that side can grab the mic and we can just share it around. Thank you.
Hello.
So, thank you all for being here. I feel really excited to be here. Look at some logistics. Water, hydration. All right, we'll keep passing them. I want to start with our Upper Valley folks, stay a little local for a moment, and just really pose the question, why are you here? Instead of New York or Portland or Kansas, or why did you and or your organization or business
Rent. When I left New York City, my rent was $3,000. There were three of us sharing it, but I had to leave New York. It was $3,000 a month. A month, $3,000 a month.
Anybody else? The Brooklynites want to know what it is now.
It's in Soho. It's by $5,000 a month.
Cheap rent was also a concern. I had lived in Seattle. I've lived in New York City. I've lived in Savannah, Georgia, before coming up here, and it was free rent when I first got here. My father-in-law had a place in. My in-laws had a small second house in Heartland, Vermont. So I was trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life and support my quickly growing family, and so we moved up here to figure that out, and we never left.
Likewise, living in San Francisco, just exceptional city, of course, and when my wife and I started a family, we recognized that that was going to be really difficult for us to do in that urban environment, and so we moved here to have happy kids.
Same here. Django, you're really happy, right? So definitely left and came back to raise the family, but and then also what I do, and many of you in this room are familiar with Revolution, and some of you aren't, but for those of you who are, what we do works as sort of it works in rural Vermont. If I put Revolution in an urban environment, it would be just another super cool hip boutique, I think, but it works. It's the contrast of being in rural Vermont that makes it work.
So what's the aspect of what you do beyond being a cool boutique?
I think it's just looking at the world of retail and thrift shop and independent design, like looking at it all in a different way.
She's being too modest. Can I?
Yes,
Can I?
please. This is a conversation.
Yeah.
I don't want to just
Kim,
direct questions.
when after my second daughter was born, I was living in Heartland, and it just got too noisy in the house, so I rented a room in the Gates Briggs building, which is right above Kim's store. And I was holed up in a little studio, no internet. I had to deal with Bonnie Briggs. That, as soon as she would rent me a studio for $150, one of the office spaces, and I didn't set up. I just had my drawing table in there. And the deal was, she hadn't rented that place in 3 years. The deal was that as soon as she rented it, I would move out and move to another empty space. Well, I move in, she kicks me out, she rents it a little bit later. and I kept bopping around. But this was before I thought about starting a cartoon school, but I would go to Revolution and sit on the couch, and your sister Robin was working then, and I would bring the brown bag lunch, and we would sit and have lunch, and it was such a welcoming environment. I met David and Matt like right away. Everybody was so damn encouraging, and also kind of, but not like super saccharine-nice, like they were all kind of freaky and odd in their own kind of reassuring way, at least to me. So I think that's
onion, we were nice.
yeah. Well, I do think that's like a big part. I feel like the Revolution is kind of like the community barbershop where people go and have an espresso and talk and feel welcome.
You do get free espresso while you're shopping.
We can do things here that perhaps they can't at other places because, for instance, in a museum or in your clothing store, we get someone from Tunbridge, Vermont come in and he's wearing overalls and he talks about cows, and then we get someone else coming in from Brooklyn and we get someone else coming in who's from Dartmouth, and so we get academics and town drunks would come into my place and they would have a handle of doers, and well, why not? So we do things you definitely cannot do in New York City, but maybe you can do in New Orleans. It's an odd sort of synergy there.
Brooklyn Rider, why do you keep coming back? Like, what is it about Dartmouth and the Upper Valley? You've been here how many times now? 3? 4? Twice?
This is the second time we've been here as a quartet.
As a
Some of
quartet.
us have been here.
But some of you have been here through Silk Road and other groups as well. So, what is it about establishing a relationship with the Upper Valley? You're just
Let's see. Our lives are defined by being itinerant musicians, and I sometimes feel like a man without a country in some ways, because we're just on the road so much of the time. But I think what coming back to a place really means, and I hope that we can come back to this place, actually, not just Dartmouth, but this very room, and do this again, or something like it again. But it's really about forming relationships, that actually carry. And when you go back to a place, you can plug immediately back into that relationship, pick up where you left off, and do something meaningful. And I think what happens when you build a relationship is the simple act of building trust. And I think all the bargains that we make as artists, whether it be through music or visual arts, fashion, whatever, it is based on this element of trust. How much do you believe what's going on? Even if it's something, fantastical in some ways. So coming back here, we've been able to, feel that trust, and it's resulted in this evening and then Friday's Almanac presentation.
I'd just add that, the relationships you form with people, even, so we haven't met every single one of you, but there's some type of connection that if you come to the concert on Friday, you've seen us kind of closer, so maybe there's a little bit more of an intimacy, and that is tangible from the stage, and makes us play better, makes us have more fun, and we get off stage in intermission, like, yeah. And there's also, there's a small amount of, that you defend the people you like. So you meet someone, you enjoy their company, you enjoy talking with them. If someone says something about them, you're like, oh, maybe not. You're like, well, no, actually, I do like that person. I've felt that person, and if that person has done something strange, you still feel a connection. So you're willing to actually go out, and that's like the trust, being able to trust what someone does, even if they make errors.
Well, also, just the first time we came here was really special. I think, for us, it was not very far off from the point where we started, playing together the quartet, and we came with a good friend of ours who also plays in the Silk Road Ensemble, Ko Mizaki, who was an alum here, and we also had a pre-existing relationship with Ted Levin, who is on the faculty, who's an incredible, he's an incredible guy, he's an incredible man, and so, it wasn't, it just didn't feel like just another residency. Right away when we got here, it felt like it was, part of the family, and the way that the kind of conversations we had at Ted's class was the students were very, they didn't feel kind of, staying above the surface. They just immediately went into the, like full of content, and having Co here was really special. So it just left really good memories with us. So it's nice to continue that, and we'll be in 2 of Ted's classes this week, which should be nice too.
Any reactions? I really, what you said about trust and defending the people you like. I mean, I would certainly say that this group of people and many others who are in the room are really their own best cheerleaders and advocates. And I mean, James jumping in and expanding on revolution is just a great example of that. Any reactions from our Pakachika folks? Things you learned, things you were inspired by, or what did watching everyone else elicit for you?
I'll jump in there and just say that as an outsider to White River Junction, it was just cool to get a sense of place, and the sense of that place interacting with the world at large, and I think that's just one thing that'll happen if you go, local. You'll find deep into it. You'll find the world. So I think that's like when we were talking. I think we often feel like. With playing as a string quartet, we come from this tradition where, at this point there's a sense that exotic is cool. But actually, it's for us, even though we were talking about this amazing experience in Iran, it wasn't necessarily as much about the Iran part of that as like, how does that relate to our lives, and how does that relate to what we are trying to do? And so I think just seeing that visually was cool.
Yeah, the deepest the connection you could have in a community when we travel, whether it's here or Central Asia or something, it's always you come back and you tell the story of being in someone's living room, not of sightseeing. Who cares after a while? It's just having that connection with someone.
Anybody else?
All politics is local.
So one response that I was getting, we will absolutely get to your questions very quickly. One response I got from everyone on this panel was that they were really honored to be keeping such great company, and I'm wondering if our local folks could share maybe a moment or a project, something that one of the other organizations here, or not on this panel, another group in the Upper Valley, something that's been done that really inspired you and got your juices flowing, and shifted the way that you pursued another project.
Well, I once did a talk here at the Mainstream Museum about the legend of the Haitian hobo. There was a fruit building that got torn down, and I must have spent like weeks putting that together, and it was like
Years.
perhaps years, because I didn't want to disappoint David. And it was, I only gave it once, and it could only have been given that night, and there was just something very special and magical about that evening. So that was pretty amazing. There's something that's just kind of infectious about the way that I guess your vision definitely just affects everybody's and how they go about their business. And I think we've all, I've given talks at Ava Gallery. You've had shows of my wife there. We've had alumni at the cartoon school teach at Ava. We've all worked on the parade together, putting on the parade together, going to the fashion shows. So it just seems so closely knit at this point. And that's kind of comforting. And I know that feeling. I think I moved around so much in my younger days, up until I was into my 30s before I kind of settled down. And I think even having settled down, there's something about kind of being an artist, at least for me, that is you perpetually feel like an outsider and an outcast, no matter how, no matter where you are. So it's nice to be part of a community of kind of weirdos that does have comfort a lot of time. Yeah, so there.
The thing that I think of most is that I know that all of us work tireless hours, and I know that it is very easy to just be plugging away at what you're doing and knowing that you've got this deadline and you've got this coming up, and then all of a sudden you just wonder like, there's this incredible thing, and I know I'm going to go and I'm going to see it and I'm going to catch it, and the sort of aggregate feeling of the weight of all of the things that you're excited to do for yourself can dissolve so readily when you are able to just get in and see the fruit of the labor of our peers in our cohort. And because it's a fabric, as I kind of said before, there are these threads that move all the way in and around and through, so that, a conversation, you realize a conversation that you had is kind of peeking up in someplace else, and then all of a sudden there's something else that you're aware of that you weren't sure if you were going to be part of, and then all of a sudden there's this just tidal wave of energy that supports everyone, including us. So to see the efforts of others realized is, the fuel that I think keeps everyone going.
And maybe it's also about, like, all politics is local. I mean, that's Tip O'Neill. I grew up in Boston, but I mean, I knew Fred Tuttle, the dairy farmer. He pulled oxen with my great-granddad at the Windsor County Fair and the Tunbridge Fair. His dad, Joe Tuttle, pulled oxen at these county fairs together. This guy Fred Tuttle ran for Senate, won the nomination here from the Republicans, because of the basic dumbness of the Republican Party here that ran a millionaire from Massachusetts, and Fred Tuttle, the real-life dairy farmer, won the goddamn nomination. And then you know Matt Dunn. Your wife is, very connected to Matt Dunn, and I get to drive Matt Dunn around, and he, ran for governor and almost got that. So we feel we can connect ourselves through politics here in a way that you certainly can't in New York State, certainly can't in California. You really feel like a civic-minded citizen for the first time. We go to the Polka Dot restaurant, we can sit down with Pat Leahy. When we sit down next to Pat Leahy, we say, "Hi, Pat."
And he remembers your name.
He remembers your name. That's the good thing. Maybe the whole country should be like that.
There are times, literally, when Josh Miller can attest to this. I get in my car and I drive downtown, a mile commute, and say, "Oh, let's go play life today in White River Junction, Vermont." And this is one of those days, because I got dressed up and we were having a pretend assassin game, and that's going on. But then also, where I don't remember if it was Nick or Colin pointing out about not taking ourselves too seriously, and that's really a critical part of day-to-day life in this community. And it was such a pleasure to, I feel like you guys are connected to this community now, and as much as the four of you performing were like one being performing, it was just all a really wonderful, kooky thing that happens, and we're really fortunate to have this, and we're fortunate also to have Dartmouth College in such close proximity that this kind of thing becomes more readily available to us.
And you guys really picked up the staff and mantle of being that local citizen. So I want to talk about our audience here, because everyone in this room was here because someone invited them. And it could have been a panelist, and it could have been an email from an organization, or 8,000 Facebook invites because we all sent you the same thing, or maybe you read about it in the Valley News. But I'm always curious, is the community we're building in our audience, I think Adam was pointing this out when we were talking about this event, is the community we're building in our audience talking to each other, and our audiences talking to each other, and entering that conversation in the same way that we on this side of the panel table are. So I want to open it to you for questions, but also for comments in that regard. And you definitely have. So just speak up and we'll repeat the question.
I have some input. First, I would just like to say we need to look at this in a historical context. In the 19th century, White River Junction was the largest cultural center between Boston and Montreal.
right? We had how many theaters here?
More than one.
That was still the largest between Boston and London.
Well, there was the Lyric Theater, where Matthew C's building is now, and I believe there were two others. There were vaudeville entertainers here. It was the largest cultural center between Boston and Montreal, and that's because in the 19th century we relied on railroads, right? Right. So that's a bit of the history here. Flash forward to 1995, when I moved to town. White River Junction, what do we have? We had the X-rated bookstore, we had the liquor store, and we had Fancy Felix, right? Those were three things that were here in 1995, right? Northern Stations here in 1997, right? But there was a theater before White River, I forget what they were called.
You're moving.
But the fact is that from there, from 95, when there was an X-rated bookstore, a liquor store, and South Main Street, which you didn't dare go down, right? Now we have a cultural center, and that's because of places like Revolution, who does, amazing community outreach, who has events, yearly fashion shows, the Oscar parties. It's not just a store. You have community connection. Main Street Museum. Well, we're all here right now. We can speak to the fact that, this is a community center. The cartoon school, right? That's all sprouted out in the course of 15 years. Ava's been here. It's been a cultural center. Flash forward, you look back, you look to the, Maxwell Parish, St. Gaudens communities here in the Cornish colonies. And this has been a place of convocation. And, there are times of, depression, and there are times of celebration. And now we're in a time of celebration. And it's because of everyone sitting here and others that the reason why we can come together and celebrate these events.
So there's this great core, one of the creative placemaking points that the NEA looks at are these walkable, livable neighborhoods. And so you've got all these clustered organizations and businesses here in White River, but then you have, what's across the river. There's Dartmouth, College on the Hill, there's Ava and Lebanon Opera House and the ballet studio and all the things that are happening in Lebanon. Is there a crosstalk? Are we doing enough to look at our creative place beyond our immediate neighbors?
Are we bifurcating?
But before we wrap up, I just want to say you are here 10 years from now doing another Pachakacha. What slide that you did not include now would you include then?
What was the criteria for the Pachakacha?
What did we ask? We asked the same question that you asked of your composers, which is who are the artists that are inspiring you?
Django, what are you going to accomplish between now and my child in a spacesuit? I don't know. Come back.
Something with Django. Okay.
I'm going to take a picture of the great faux place, or the place I can get a beef and bean burrito with fresh guacamole.
I will have one Valley Royale.
Ask him about Valley Royale.
Apartment building in downtown that's mixed rates for rental apartments right in our downtown.
I'm not sure. I think that ideally I'll find something that's even funnier.
I think the great thing is I don't know what that'll be, and that's the exciting thing about being an artist. Maybe it's going to be some collaboration that comes from an event like this. Maybe it'll be, some being in Bahrain for doing a workshop in Bahrain through the U.S. government, or who knows what it's going to be. But that's the exciting thing, that you kind of invest in the work, and then the work opens the doors. And I think sometimes we put the carriage in front of the horse, and when you're asking questions about the community and how it all fits together, I think a lot of times you just have your head down and you're trying to make the best work you can. And then once you do that, then it's like, okay, now how do I make some money off this and get invited to gigs and et cetera, et cetera. But
but you know, if you invest in the work, that usually that's the thing.
And Nick, are you gonna have a picture of your house in White River?
Eric might.
Well, I was going to say I'm planning on that 2020 sabbatical, and I, come up here and spend some time. So maybe 2 years later.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And Nicole just wanted to either quickly mention, or do you want to?
Sure.
Just run her up. Nicole from the Main Street Museum. I want to thank them again for being such fabulous hosts.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Brooklyn Rider, and everyone for being here, and all of our panelists for the wonderful words they have to share with us. We hope that you'll stay with us. We have wine and refreshments out on the deck, and please go and browse the collections if you have not seen them before. Enjoy the museum, and thank you so much for coming.
And donations are always accepted at the Main Street Museum.
Yes, we accept them. Thank you so much.